Everyone, this is Nikachu, and we are going to talk about some of the really exciting stuff that is being stolen out of the factory of Wizards of the Coast. Stuff is being snatched, entire full sheets of uncut cards, swiped out of Wizards factory, spoiled to us today. Yes, Ixalan, once known as Atlazan in rumor, is actually Ixalan, and it is going to have three very exciting creature types. One of them being pirates, one of them being dinosaurs, but of course the one that we care the most about, Merfolk. Merfolk returning to Ixalan in a huge way. We're going to have tons of Merfolk cards, and let's hope that we get some bombs that can help us compete in Modern and Legacy. And the most critical one, the one that everyone's talking about right now, is Kopala, Warden of the Waves. Let me just start off by saying that this must officially be the sister of the Master of Waves. The Master is the Master of the Waves, but Kopala is the Warden of the Waves. She's the Warden, and she is, she's the gatekeeper of these waves. So what does she do? She is a legendary creature for blue, one colorless. A Merfolk wizard. Spells your opponents cast that target a Merfolk you control cost one more to cast, and abilities your opponents activate that target a Merfolk you control cost one more to activate. Now, this was from a very blurry image of an uncut sheet, and this is not particularly official because we can't exactly see for sure what the cost is to our opponent. What is the official tax? Because I think personally, it costs two more to target a Merfolk with an activated ability. That's from what I see. So, but for now, we're just going to go with it. We're going to interpret it as though it were one until we get more information, until we get a clearer image. So, right off the bat, this creature directly competes with Kira, Great Glass Spinner. Kira has done great work for Merfolk in the past, has been a absolute staple in our toolbox, and frankly, I think is just a much better effect. Like, if your opponent is going to pay one more mana, why don't you make that one more mana a spell in addition to the original spell that you cast? So, for example, in Kira's case, if you target a Merfolk with Fatal Push, you're going to have to spend another mana and another spell in order to kill that Merfolk. But with Kopala, all you have to do is just pay 2 mana to cast Fatal Push once, and then that's it. Whereas with Kira, you have to pay 2 mana anyway, but 2 spells. That is a 2-for-1. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, do you want Nikachu? Kira's a bit clunky. It's not really consistent with our deck. I mean, you can't cast her off of Cavern of Souls. She doesn't get pumped up by the Lords. She loses synergy there. And you're right, you're gonna be able to play Kopala off of Cavern of Souls. She's gonna get pumped up by the Lords, but still the ability is strictly inferior to what Kira's already doing for us. But that's not to say that Kopala is totally useless. Now, she is basically very similar to a very old card. If you've been around with Merfolk for a while, you're going to remember Monastery Siege. Monastery Siege was a card that everyone was super excited about, and a lot of people jammed this card. If you chose Khans, then you got a looting effect out of Monastery Siege, but if you choose Dragons, your opponents are going to have to pay 2 more in order to target Merfolk or to target you with their spells. This taxing effect got a lot of people excited, but ultimately, it was okay, but ultimately it didn't really work. And it's because decks with spot removal ended up going long. And in long games, they could just pay the tax, and it wasn't really that big of a deal. I remember people were paying 5 mana to play Electrolyze on my creatures. It wasn't really that hard to do, and I don't think it made that big of a deal. And as a result, the card crashed and burned. A lot of people played it. A lot of people swore by it. Oh, it works. It's so good. but ultimately it was hard to cast on 3 consistently. And even if you did, it didn't really win the game all the time. Your opponent could very easily just shoot your creatures down, only one removal spell a turn, and that was totally fine. There was, however, a glaring weakness in Monastery Siege, and that was it wasn't a creature, it was an enchantment. So if we had a creature form, we could get it through with Aether Vial, but in addition to that, it's something that can attack. That's something that can put a clock on our opponent. Just like how Kira Great Glassspinner can swing in the air for 2 damage, Kopala can get in there in the red zone, swing with Island Walk for 3 or 4, and do some work for us. Whereas Monastery Siege couldn't do that. It was just a bump on the log, and when the game went super late, that Dragon's mode was useless. And as time went on, clearly Monastery Siege did not stand the test of time. I do not include it in my Merfolk toolbox because I just don't think it's useful at all. So Kopala is an improved version of Monastery Siege because she's a creature. Unfortunately, the ability will not stack on Kopala because she is legendary. That was something that Monastery Siege had over Kopala. If you had several Monastery Sieges in play, they would have to pay an extra two for each siege that was in play. Whereas Kopala is legendary, we're only going to have one, and that's it. Some benefits to Kopala is that she's going to make Curse Catcher more valuable much longer into the game. Curse Catcher, great as an early creature, but even once you get into the middle game, he loses a lot of value quite quickly because our opponent can now play around him. So I think Kopala is going to bring us more value to Curse Catcher even in the middle game. Curse Catcher will still be useless in the late game, but with Kopala, we're going to be able to bring more value in the middle game. And what I'm saying is, like, Kolaghan's Command costing 4 mana is going to be pretty serious. And out of Jund decks, or Grixis Death Shadow, or Jund Death Shadow, being able to, on the off chance that our opponent is playing with Maelstrom Pulse, that's going to be important. So I think Curse Catcher is going to have more value going later into the game. There are going to be some niche exception, or there are going to be oddball situations where Kopala shines. Like Walking Ballista is going to be a hell of a lot weaker when you have to get to Tron, almost tap out for 3 counters, and you're going to have to pay 1 mana for every single counter that you want to remove. I mean, you're not going to be able to kill a Lord even if you make Tron. So you hit Tron, you get 7 mana, and you can't even kill 1 Lord on that turn because you need to remove 2 counters instead of just 1. Liliana, the Last Hope, won't be able to strike our Master of Waves because if they tap out for Liliana, the Last Hope, they're going to have to pay 2 if they want to target our Master of Waves. So Kopala does have some niche uses there. Ultimately, I think the biggest problem with Kopala is that right now the metagame is not spell heavy in that there aren't many it's not a removal spell metagame right now, aside from Grixis Death Shadow and maybe a little bit out of Eldrazi Tron because of Walking Ballista, Spatial Contortion, and Dismember. Everyone else is using sweepers. We're talking Anger of the Gods, Ratchet Bomb, Engineered Explosives. Look at Blue-White Control. They're playing 5 removal spells in the form of Condemn and Path to Exile. I mean, that's about it. And the rest, they're just using Elspeth, Gideon, Engineered Explosives, Supreme Verdict. That's all they need to use. So this is not really the metagame for Kopala, Warden of the Waves. And lastly, and I think the single most important aspect about evaluating this card is it doesn't help us in any of the matchups that we're suffering right now. It doesn't help us again. The matchups that we have the most trouble against: Affinity, Elves, Red-Green Valakut, Lantern Control, Counters Company. Kopala does nothing to help us against any of those decks. None of those decks are focused on using removal spells or activated abilities that target our creatures. Affinity is just going to fly over us and hit us for a ton of damage. Elves is just going to spew a bunch of elves on the board and overrun us with Azuri. Lantern Control is still going to play a bridge on the board and not target us with anything. Counter's Company will make an infinite amount of mana and just win the game on this. I mean, they could look for the Ballista, play the Ballista, and then pay for the ability that Warden of the Waves has. Well, I mean, doesn't even matter. They just target us. And Red-Green Valakut is just all mana, and generally is not targeting our creatures anyway. So I think this is the biggest problem. Kopala is a pretty cool card. Definitely has benefits, but is also just not helping the matchups that we need a lot of help against. So that is my evaluation of Kopala, Warden of the Waves. What do you think is good about this card? What do you want to get out of it? What do you think are the problems of this card? I also think that maybe in a more aggressive like a more aggressive version of Merfolk, if one could exist, could use Kopala, because if you don't make it to the late game, or if you make someone struggle to the late game and close the game out before the game goes long, then Kopala has a lot of value. But unfortunately, if a game ever goes long, then even the spot removal decks are just going to tear us apart. Just one removal spell at a time. So yeah, that's my evaluation of Kopala, Warden of the Waves. I am very excited though that, this is a cool card. It's got a lot of cool stuff going for it, and I'm really excited to see what else is going to come out of Ixalan for our Merfolk tribe. So this has been Nikachu evaluating Kopala, Warden of the Waves.